Okay, for part two, we got a little video here, so let's check this out. Not too long. Oops. This time for sure.
Emotion is a nonverbal language.
Did you tell me to do this?
Emotions reveal the cognition, the understanding of the baby. And furthermore, emotions are the nonverbal communication of the baby towards the parent and the parent towards the baby. Therefore, I thought that emotions were a royal road, one royal road, to the study of the baby's development.
In this study, babies between 9 and 12 months are brought into the lab and placed on a large plexiglass top table. Half of the table has a checkerboard pattern just underneath the surface. But halfway across is a visual cliff, which the baby can tell drops off steeply. The plexiglass top continues, so it's perfectly fine to proceed. But the baby isn't so sure. And this is a big drop for a baby just starting to crawl. She wants to get across to get the toy, but she's cautious and looks to the opposite end of the table where her mother is. The parent is instructed to smile or make a fear face.
If the mother is posing a fear face, the baby typically does not cross this stair-step downward, this modified visual cliff or visual step. On the other hand, if the mother poses a smile or somehow poses a nonverbal communication that is not prohibitive but encouraging, the child is much more likely to cross over to her. This particular study demonstrates the role of nonverbal communication in determining the child's behavior in uncertain contexts. A baby will, when they encounter something ambiguous, something uncertain, will typically look to the significant other, the mother, the father, a grandparent, the caregiver, in order to figure out what to do. So by 11 to 12 months of age, the baby is already doing what all of us do when something unusual happens. We look around to figure out how other people are reacting.
So that was Joseph Campos talking to us about social referencing. Is that adaptive or what? Think about it. The infants that don't have the ability to read emotional expression and respond to them, right, might in fact put themselves in greater danger and succumb to some kind of accident that prevents them from reproducing in the future. Right, Quincy? So we can see that while we might say emotions are vestigial, on the other hand, we might be able to make a case that in fact they still remain adaptive, just in new and different ways in different contexts, right? As our challenges change, our environmental challenges. And that's the process of natural selection. Who's the adaptable one? In this case, we can see where that might be quite useful. So let's talk about neo-Darwinism, and we're going to look at these facial expressions. We're going to head towards an assignment for you guys. That's all what's coming at us. So I didn't grow asters this year. I think I got to grow asters next year. Really pretty flowers. Anyway, neo-Darwinism, right? Hardwired emotions. How many of you have heard of Paul Ekman? So now we're going to talk about Paul Ekman here for a little bit. What do we know? Hardwired emotions. Now, theory of emotion. Paul Ekman, why do you call it an emotion? He says, well, I'm going to call these emotions because they're hardwired. That is, human beings display them. And all human beings, universality, right, because this is neo-Darwinist, should display these emotions. So they promote innate emotions, typically innate, inborn, environment, evolutionary legacy, right? Anger, fear, sadness, disgust, and enjoyment. That is, we are all wired to be able to demonstrate these emotions. So Ekman probably leads this kind of theoretical camp, perspective, whatever, field, and Emotions Revealed, Understanding Face and Feelings, 2004. He identified 6 basic emotions. And how did he do this? Well, he went around the world and he would show people pictures of emotional expressions, and he'd say, what emotion is this being expressed? And then he would just do the math. So he was definitely taking an empirical approach. And when he, around proportion of countries correctly identifying a fear expression, 19 out of 21. And he says, so regardless of what country I'm in, almost every country can recognize fear. Thus, we're going to call it a hardwired basic emotion. Anger, 18 out of 21. Surprise, 20 out of 21. This is some pretty impressive numbers, right? So when the basic premise is that when one experiences a strong emotion without attempting to conceal them, and that's an important caveat, right? The basic emotion will be expressed in the same way, hence the universality hypothesis, linking him to Darwin as a neo-Darwinist. So let's try it out. Let's do 6 basic emotions, and I want you guys then to jot down or just shout out. I think you should shout this out, because if there's people around watching you watch this, then it would be really freaky for them, right? But so this expression, what's this one? Okay, you got that? What about this one? And then let's finish out the top row, and let's name this one. And notice that these two kind of are relatively similar. Can you differentiate them? Now, what's this young man? What's his deal? How about her? And then finally, in my experience in showing these to students, this is probably the toughest one of the 6 here that are on display, right? So what Ekman finds then is he shows these across countries. He shows this picture to 21 different countries, and 19 out of 20 or 20 out of 21 get this correct, right? They say, oh, that's such and such. Hence his evidence for the universality. But as he takes us around and he gives talks and he writes articles, etc., other people say, I think there's another one. And Darwin, Ekman probably got sick of hearing this. But he did decide to include a new one. Based on people's suggestions. And what do you think? So what's she got going? And the 7th basic emotion, right, in fact, is contempt. All right, so what do we have? We have happy, we have surprise, we have fear, we have sadness, we have disgust. We have anger, disgust, and sadness, and the last one is known as contempt. All right. And let me ask you this. Let's suppose I was at a bar and I just said, hi, my name's Mark. Would you let me buy you a drink? And that's the expression the response. What do you think? Am I doing okay? Yeah, I better move on, right? That's contempt. And we'll talk more about contempt because it's an interesting one. Let's try it again. Different faces. But, and this is kind of the variability thing, do different people express emotion in the same way? So let's do it again. What do you got here? What do you got here? What do you got there? And here, and here, and there. All right? All right. If you think you're a freaking hot shot now, let's try some tougher ones. No. The problem is that we have the ability to mask our expressions. That is, we have the ability to maybe not display what we don't want to display. So now we have to look for more subtle cues, right? And so this first one, what do you got? These are tough. That is actually a surprise. Okay. Let's go to the second one on the top. Anger. Let's go to the third one, the last one on the top. Fear. Don't let them see you sweat, right? Don't show them you're afraid. Well, that's what she's trying to do there, but there is some leakage, and skilled people will be able to determine it. This is, in fact, an aspect of emotional intelligence, if you will. Now we've got disgust. What do you got? Center. Happiness. And then the last one, contempt. So not every smile is a happy smile. It can be a contemptuous smile, if you will. So if you think you're pretty good at this, let's check it out. So here we go. What I want you to do, and I know a couple of you have done this already, is one, take 2 pictures of yourself portraying 2 different emotions. That's your choice, right? So you can take 2 pictures or have someone take the pictures of you, right? And then you're going to post them where 5 teammates can see them. And I thought the best way to do this would be on the discussion board. So I set up a discussion board for you to post the pictures, and that way you'll be able to see them from your teammates, etc. And you can post pictures on there. Right? Some people have already done it, so we know it works, right? Each team member needs to guess which 2 emotions are being portrayed for each teammate. So if you have 6 people in your team, you're going to post 2 pictures, right? And then your 5 teammates are going to look, and they're all going to make a guess of everyone's 2. And you'll see the setup. Check and Carmen, you have the template to figure it out, right? Once the guesses have been made, the team member will reveal the actual emotional expression attempted. So that way we're allowed to check if we're correct or not, and then ultimately in this assignment you're going to total the number of correct guesses for each emotional expression. Okay? A lot like Ekman did. So we're kind of recreating what Ekman did. Questions? And see the assignment on Carmen for additional clarity, and we can also see you during our classroom session. So let us then talk about, let's listen to Ekman for a minute.
Each emotion has 3 related states. It's easiest for me to show you this with anger. Anger is the emotion. It can last as little as a few seconds, as long as many minutes, sometimes hours. If it lasts a whole day, we're in an irritable mood. Now, moods differ not only in their duration, but when we're in a mood, we're looking for a chance to indulge in emotion. So when I'm irritable, I'm looking for a chance to get angry. And I'll get angry about things that ordinarily wouldn't get me angry. Another way moods differ from emotions is that I can usually, at least afterwards, tell you what triggered it. But I can't always tell you why I'm in an irritable mood. Sometimes I just wake up that way. So they seem to have some autonomous neurohormonal causes. So that's a mood. Now then there's a trait. Hostility is the trait. That doesn't just last a whole day. That can last a lifetime, or at least a life epoch, most of adulthood. Now what are hostile people? Those are people who get angry easily, and their anger lasts a long time. They're like people who are always in an irritable mood, or most of the time. And so it differs from the mood, and it doesn't come and go. There's a lot of work going on to try to determine what produces emotional traits. And then we have emotional disorders, where the emotion is so disordered that you cannot live your life. Now, we don't have a term in English for chronic impulsive violence. We don't have a single word. But that's where anger is a pathological disorder. Panic disorders are when fear has become emotional. Depression is when despair has become. So each of these have a mood, and they have a trait, and they have a disorder.
Of course, that is from Ekman himself, and he has certainly built the reputation to be an authority on this. So let's kind of summarize then. So I created this table, right, and this is from Keltner et al. Keltner and his folks are big emotion researchers. So expressions are automatic, and one of the fascinating things, and they're very brief, right, so often we have a reaction it shows on our face, and we might say, oh my God, I don't want anyone to know that I'm feeling that way, so we mask our face. But expressions are thought to be automatic and very quick. Now, self-reported emotions, as Ekman described, probably occur over the period of minutes, and we're able to actually report on what I'm feeling. Oh my God, I'm so pissed off that they did that. Right? Now, moods are longer term, they're diffuse, and they often don't have clear sources that instigated them, as Ekman suggested. And then finally, personality traits are chronic dispositions that are associated to moods, which cause a preference for certain emotional responding. So hostile people are often in a bad mood, and they interpret the world around them to justify anger responses, right? So we can see how these kind of work in service of each other. And then emotion disorders, as Ekman described, takes it even a step further. Now, Ekman did a TV show that, well, didn't do a TV show. He advised on the show, and the show was about his research. Does anyone know the show that featured Ekman? And it was a show called Lie to Me, and I love the show. A lot of it was kind of not necessarily accurate, but it was fascinating to think about. And some of the most interesting work in the show was about micro-expressions. And what we see is, again, if we borrow the camera, and this time we're going to borrow a video camera, and we're going to record someone's facial expression as it erupts, and then perhaps as they seek to inhibit the expression of that emotion from their face. But what happens is, we see that the non-conscious, the automatic part that causes the expression, then can be overridden by the conscious. One thing that we need to understand in our dual process models is non-conscious is fast, conscious is slower. So non-conscious automatic responses then precede conscious responses. So an emotion is triggered, but I want to inhibit it. The inhibitory process is coming after the triggering of the emotion. So for this minute slice of time, maybe 1/10 of a second, we see the face begin to erupt into an anger expression, but it says, oh my God, this is my boss, I can't be angry, so we mask that expression. There is a micro expression that occurs over that 1/10 of a second, though, give or take, right? Which then is a clue to the person's real state. Now, if we're videoing, we can do freeze frame, and we can actually watch it erupt and then be inhibited. So, there's 7 universal emotions that were depicted: disgust, anger, fear, sadness, surprise, contempt. Over time, Ekman's expanded his research by deciphering that there are approximately 43 unique muscle movements in the human face can make, and they can go on to determine emotions such as guilt or pride. And this is kind of a fascinating idea, because if we're able to now do freeze frame and watch these individual muscle groups erupt, then we can think about in terms of what emotion is going to be displayed. So, combining 2 facial movements, there's 300 potential combinations. If we look at 5 different movements, then there's maybe 10,000 different combinations. In turn, only about 3,000 combinations turned out to have any kind of actual meaning. The rest are just kind of residual features of facial movement. Ekman and his colleagues spent 7 years. When you think in terms of research programs, don't think in terms of a study. Think about multiple studies over a period of many years, right? Meticulously cataloging the different potential micro-expressions. This resulted in the completion of the facial action coding system. So if you wanted to work in Ekman's lab as an undergraduate, as a research assistant, then you're going to learn the facial action coding system. And that is each set of muscles, as it starts to move, you're going to be able to classify movement in that area and then understand what it means. So basic theories of emotion. We haven't talked about this yet. It's time for us to talk about this, right? Now, some students say, oh my God, there's so much. Do I have to remember this? And no, not really, especially since our quiz is open book and open note. There really should be no impetus to memorize the details. But what's important here is the general conceptual nature of this. Think about a researcher, and we're going to run into a whole bunch of different researchers, right? We got these different researchers. Well, they list basic emotions. Many of them say, so what is the basic emotions? And let's go to Ekman, Friesen, right? Anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, surprise. The 6 basic, contempt was added. But you say, Ekman, and colleagues, how the hell did you come to this? And he says, I call these basic emotions because they're universal facial expressions present in all peoples and recognizable by virtually all peoples across the planet. Notice, neo-Darwinist, what is Darwin saying? The universality hypothesis. Ekman, the neo-Darwinist, comes along and says universal facial expressions. Right? Now, other people don't necessarily agree. Let's go down to Panskamp. He says expectancy, fear, rage, and panic are my 4 basic emotions. So he differs in number, and he differs quite a bit from Ekman, right? And he says, how do I include these? Because they're hardwired. So he's another guy that's talking about the biological perspective. And so would Izard. But notice his list is a little bit different. Let's get to a different group, though. Let's go on up to Plutchik. Acceptance, anger, anticipation, disgust, joy, fear, sadness, surprise. Similar list, right? But it's relation to adaptive biology processes. So he's very in line with Darwin, talking about these can facilitate successful adaptation and therefore their evolutionary legacies that we observe. Now, Tompkins, we'll talk about Tompkins later, is the density of neural firing. Maybe one of the most modern perspectives. Let's get to that. I want to pick on a couple of these, like Frege, right, and Arnold's group. Relation to action tendencies. And these people have kind of advanced in general the notion that emotions are for doing. Emotions are related to behavior in terms of action, right? So, and then finally, who do we have? Let's not forget William James. Let's close out this part with William James. Remember William James? I see a bear, I run, then I realize I'm afraid. Well, bodily involvement. He's about the only one to go with that camp. So, let us then break for the next part.